The assumption is simple. Humans started wearing clothes because we got cold. We moved into colder climates, we needed protection. That's not what happened. Genetic evidence puts clothing's origin in Africa, tens of thousands of years before any migration into the cold. Not fur, not frostbite, not some freezing cave in Ice Age Europe. Africa. Warm, humid, nowhere near needing insulation. And yet, humans were already covering their bodies, long before the cold ever became a problem. For most of human history, we assume clothing meant survival, meant staying alive against the elements. But the timeline doesn't match that story. Something else made humans cover their skin first, and it happened tens of thousands of years earlier than expected. So if it wasn't the cold, what was it? How do scientists even know when clothing began? Clothing doesn't fossilize. It rots, it tears, it disappears. There's no first shirt buried in the dirt. So researchers had to find another kind of evidence, something that doesn't decay, something living. This is the story of a parasite, a genetic clock, and what it reveals about why humans covered their bodies at all. Here's where it starts, with lice. Not head lice, body lice. Two nearly identical species, living on humans, but in completely different places. Head lice live in hair, gripping strands with claws built for round shafts. Body lice live somewhere else entirely, in fabric, in seams, pressed against skin, in the folds of clothing. And here's the part nobody talks about. Body lice can't survive without clothing. No fabric, no habitat. No habitat, no lice. Which means every body louse alive today is proof of something. Proof that humans were already wearing something to live on. In 2003, a team led by biologist Mark Stoneking at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology sequenced the DNA of both lice species, head lice and body lice, looking for the exact moment they split into two, genetically speaking. Because DNA mutates at a fairly steady rate, scientists can use that rate like a clock, count the differences, estimate how long ago two populations diverged. Same method used to date when humans split from chimpanzees, except this time the subject was an insect that lives in your shirt. The result was published in the journal Current Biology, and it wasn't a small number.
Body lice split off from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago. Not 10,000, not 40,000, 170,000 years. Long before agriculture, long before cave paintings, long before humans had left the African continent in large numbers. Every line of that DNA pointed to the same conclusion. Clothing is far older than the Ice Age survival story suggests, and it started in a place that was never cold. Researchers cross-checked the estimate with different mutation rate models, different labs, different math. The number kept landing in the same range, somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago, centered right around that same striking figure. This wasn't a guess, it was a repeatable, testable result, built on a parasite that shouldn't exist without fabric. So the earliest solid evidence for clothing doesn't come from a museum, it comes from a blood-sucking insect that adapted to a new environment, human clothes. And adaptation like that doesn't happen overnight. Lice need generations, hundreds of them, to evolve traits suited to fabric instead of hair. Different claw shape, different body size, different egg-laying behavior, all specialized for gripping woven fiber, not curved strands of hair. Which means clothing wasn't a one-off invention. Worn once, forgotten, reinvented later. It was consistent, habitual, present long enough for an entire parasite species to evolve around it. That's not a costume, that's infrastructure, a biological pressure real enough to reshape another organism's evolution. And it was happening in Africa, nearly 100,000 years before large-scale migration into colder climates. So the question shifts. If people in warm, humid Africa were already wearing something habitual enough to birth a new species of parasite, what were they covering themselves for? It clearly wasn't the cold. Not yet. Not there. Here's what's genuinely strange about that timeline. Modern humans in Africa, 170,000 years ago, had no need for insulation. Average temperatures were nowhere close to freezing. No snow to trudge through, no frostbite risk waiting outside the cave. And still, the evidence says something was already being worn, consistently, long enough to matter biologically. So science had a mystery on its hands. Clothing existed. Cold didn't demand it. Something else did.
And that mystery is where the second piece of evidence comes in. Because lice can tell you when, they can't tell you why.
So here's the reframing question. Not when did clothing start, but what problem was it solving before cold ever existed? The answer starts with something humans lost long before they lost clothing. Researchers call it the naked ape problem. Sometime around 1 to 2 million years earlier, early humans had already lost most of their body hair. Not clothing, hair, the actual fur that covers most mammals. Evolutionary biologists mostly agree on why. Sweat. Humans became one of the only mammals built to run long distances in heat. Persistence hunters, chasing prey for hours across open savanna until it collapsed from heat. To do that, you need to cool down fast, and thick fur traps heat. So the fur went. Millions of sweat glands took its place instead, which solved one problem, overheating, and created a brand new one, bare skin, exposed directly to sun, insects, and injury. For 1 million years or more, that trade-off was manageable. Then something changed. In 2010, archaeologist Gilligan at the University of Sydney published research reframing the entire timeline of clothing. His argument was simple, and it broke from the standard story. Clothing wasn't invented to fight the cold. It was invented to fight exposure. Sun, parasites, physical damage to skin that no longer had fur to protect it. And this is the part usually left out completely: social display. Gilligan's research points to a simple clothing phase: loose wraps, hides draped over shoulders, not tailored, not fitted, just coverage. Worn in warm climates for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature, skin protection, status, identity, a way of saying this is who I am without a word. Around the same period, at Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood's team uncovered something else entirely. Deliberately pierced shell beads, traces of ochre pigment, processed and stored, dated to roughly 75,000 years ago, long before any of this was necessity. These weren't tools, they weren't weapons, they were personal decoration. Evidence that early humans were already using their bodies to say something: group, status, belonging. And here's the part that reframes everything. If humans were already decorating skin with beads and pigment before they needed protection from weather, early clothing may have started the exact same way. Not as a shield, as a signal. Something worn to be seen, not something worn to survive. That single shift changes the meaning of the lice-clock discovery. It's not just a story about survival technology. It's a story about the moment humans needed to cover themselves for other people, not for the weather, for each other.
And once a species starts covering itself for social reasons, once exposure itself becomes something to manage, that behavior doesn't disappear. It just finds new versions of itself, century after century, long after the original reason stopped mattering. So the picture forming here is different from the one most people assume. Clothing didn't begin as armor against a hostile climate. It began as armor against something quieter, exposure itself, bare skin, without fur, without covering, in a world full of eyes, sun, insects, injury, judgment, all of it landing on the same unprotected surface. And humans adapted the way they always adapt, not by growing the fur back, by inventing a replacement for it. So what changed it? What turned a social signal into survival gear? The answer is migration. Roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, groups of humans began moving out of Africa, north, into Europe, into Central Asia, into landscapes that had never once needed to be survived without fur. Ice sheets, sub-zero winters, environments that could kill an unprotected body in a matter of hours. This is where the second phase of clothing begins, what Gilligan calls complex clothing. Not loose wraps thrown over shoulders, fitted garments, sewn seams, layers designed to trap air, not just cover skin. And archaeology backs this up with something clothing itself can't provide: tools. Bone needles with eyed holes, fine enough to pull thread through hide, found at sites in Russia and Siberia. Dated to around 40,000 years ago, right when humans were pushing into the coldest parts of Eurasia. So here's the actual sequence, laid out in order. First, humans lose their fur, over 1 million years ago, for heat. Then, in Africa, they begin covering exposed skin, around 170,000 years ago, for protection, for display.
Then, tens of thousands of years later, they migrate into the cold, and only then does clothing evolve into something built for survival. Fitted, insulated, engineered. The cold didn't invent clothing. The cold upgraded it. Here's a small detail most people never connect. The word textile comes from the Latin texere, to weave, the same root that gives us the word text. Because writing, in its earliest form, was also thought of as weaving. Threads of meaning pulled together into a single structure. Humans were weaving protection and weaving language using the same instinct. Long before either one was a matter of survival. Covering the body and covering meaning come from the same root. Take something exposed, give it structure, make it legible to other people. That instinct didn't start in the snow. It started under the African sun, with skin that had nothing left to protect it.
And once you see it that way, the lice-clock number stops looking strange. 170,000 years ago isn't an outlier. It's the moment a chain reaction started. Lose the fur, cover the skin, turn covering into meaning. Turn meaning into a habit stable enough to build an ecosystem around. Literally, an insect species evolved around human behavior. That's not incidental. That's proof of how deep the pattern runs. In 2011, researchers Toops, Kitchen, Light, and Reed published a follow-up study in Molecular Biology and Evolution, refining the original lice-clock estimate with a broader genetic dataset. Their number landed in almost the exact same range. Independent confirmation. Different data, same conclusion. Clothing is old, older than cold ever demanded it to be. And once you strip away the Ice Age survival myth, what's left is a much stranger, much older story. Not about weather, about exposure. About the moment a hairless species first understood it needed a barrier. Not from the elements, from being seen, unprotected, by everyone around it. And that's the detail worth sitting with, because humans never stopped doing this. We didn't lose the instinct once the Ice Age ended. We just moved it somewhere else. So what if this was never really about fabric at all? What if the story of clothing is actually the story of something else? Something humans have been doing since long before the first thread was spun. Covering exposure. Not from wind, not from snow, from being seen, fully, unprotected, by people who might judge what they find. Every generation since has built its own version of that same instinct, a version with no fur and no fabric involved at all. The version that rehearses a sentence 11 times before it leaves your mouth. The version that rewrites a text before sending it. The version that keeps the camera off, keeps the door half closed, keeps the real answer just slightly out of reach, even from people who ask. It isn't weakness. It's the same biological program that once told a hairless primate, cover the skin. Except now, the skin isn't the vulnerable part. The thoughts are. The needs are. The exhaustion nobody was supposed to notice is. And here's what's easy to miss. That original instinct to cover, to layer, to add distance from exposure wasn't a flaw. It kept an entire species alive across 170,000 years of unpredictable environments. It wasn't dysfunction. It was calibration. A nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. Responding to exposure the only way it knows how. By adding a layer. So if you've ever felt like you're wearing armor nobody can see, like there's a version of you that only exists fully alone, unwitnessed, that's not something broken in you. That's 170,000 years of precedent. Humans have never once stopped covering the exposed parts. We just ran out of fur first. Then we ran out of easy explanations for why we keep doing it. The lice didn't lie. Something was already being worn long before the cold made it necessary. And something in you has probably been doing the same thing, long before anyone told you it was necessary either. Not because you were taught to hide, because some part of the original programming never got the memo that danger passed. Africa, long before the cold, long before anyone needed protection from the weather, something in a hairless, exposed body already knew. Cover what's underneath. Long before anyone was asking why.